At 3 different universities, and about 7 years ago had a heart attack, had lung disease, Bell's palsy, woke up in the morning, my face was totally paralyzed, went and had a couple of stents put in my heart. Then about a year later they wanted to do open heart surgery, and I went to a health food store and I asked the nutritionist at the store if there's any possibility of avoiding open heart surgery. So a friend of mine had just had it and passed away from a blood clot when he was walking with his wife about 2 weeks later. And she said that there was only one particular doctor in Orlando at the time where I was living, a fellow by the name of Curtis Kalidas, one of every, it's like a half a dozen doctors who has a double doctorate. And I went to him. He was an MD for 14 years, an internist. As he tells the story, he was tired of writing out prescriptions and watching his patients go downriver. He left to Washington State for 2 years. He supported his family, still in Orlando. He has children back in school. He lost about $350,000 per year for those 2 years, but he became a naturopathic physician. You know, today, what I'd like to do, and maybe, you know, the title should be Stop and Think About Your Life. Going back to Aristotle's teaching, we've all been programmed. We're nothing but a habit. My job is to unlock the mental handcuffs that you may have had in the same way that I had. You know, I always thought that the FDA was a great agency, Food and Drug Administration, until we started, Dr. Kalidas started educating me about, you know, things that we eat. Now, some things you might not want to know, so I've also brought along the black hat, and I'm going to ask you, please don't shoot the messenger if you don't like the message. Okay? My job isn't to entertain you over the next few minutes. My job is to educate you. If you don't become uncomfortable enough for you to have a sleepless night tonight and say, well, what else could I be doing? You know, am I really willing to change? Am I really willing to admit that I love my family and my children and my grandchildren enough to help change for them? Change is the hardest thing in the world for anyone to go through. You know, we think we know. We've you know, become creatures of habit. Matter of fact, use a tube of toothpaste. Manufacturers have tried 17 different times to take the toothpaste and put it into a pump handle. We don't buy it. Why? We like squeezing the last bit out. You know, my job is to have you start putting your heart back into some of the things that you eat, and realize that you are limiting your life expectancy. I'll be 64 this year. I outswim my son. I've had 14 operations. I'm still scheduled for a couple of more. You know, what's one of the worst drugs in the world? Coca-Cola. The most addicting beverage in the entire world. Matter of fact, some countries will not permit Coke to have their factories because of the runoff. Now, I don't know if you know the history of Coke. Wouldn't you agree with me that history is very, very important? You know, if you don't know the history, then you don't know the future, and you can't plan for the future. History of Coca-Cola, a chemist was trying to get rust off of iron and invented the formula for Coca-Cola. It was sold to a couple of businessmen a couple of years later. Then SunTrust Bank went out and got him the loan. Do you know what phosphoric acid is? You know, do you know what carbonic acid is? You know, you could take some of this Coke and pour it on your car batteries, their corrosion, and it'll eat it up. When basically phosphoric acid fertilizer goes into a lake, it kills the oxygen. Now, keep in mind, it also has 39 grams of sugar. Did you ever think about 39 grams of sugar? Let me show you what 39 grams of sugar looks like. 2 test tubes in a small can of Coke. And how many cans do you drink a day? Wall Street Journal not too long ago, about a year ago, wrote an article, front page, on how Coca-Cola causes heart attacks. You know, Coke sales didn't drop at all. Why? Because we're creatures of habit. As I mentioned, the hardest thing to do is change. You know, let's look at some very common products. Can of ravioli. 950 milligrams of sodium. Do you know what your sodium intake should be for the day? 2,000 milligrams, a half a teaspoon. 500 people a week are dying of too much salt. 150,000 people a year. Too much salt. Well, sometimes it's as simple as becoming aware, and becoming aware is the very first step of change. This particular one, the difference in Hunt's is only 390 milligrams. So you need to start reading the labels. What about Chunky? Campbell's soup, yum yum good. Been listening to their ads for years. You have sodium 410. If we're looking at the light chicken gumbo, you have sodium of 870. Again, 1 can of soup. Oh, but wait a second. Oh, this only shows that half of the can has that much in sodium. So we want to start looking and reading the labels of how many servings is in the can. How many servings is in that bottle of soda? You know, if you have heart disease, if you have high blood pressure, you should be restricted to only 1,000 to 2,000 milligrams a day, maximum. Now, we have some papers on the table. The very first thing, I am not a doctor. I am not a medical doctor. I am just telling you the things that I did. Okay? My surgeon, my cardiologist was all ready to operate, and I went to this Curdy Colitis, and he gave me what's called chelation treatments. Very few people know what they are. You get a needle in your arm for about an hour and a half. It's like an IV, and you go 3 times a week. Chelation was actually invented about 1944 because of the Second World War. It takes the metals out of our body. Our bodies cannot digest the antibiotics, the fertilizers that you're eating in your food.